이렇게 누나가 한국에 와주실지 아마 몰랐을 것 같고, 제가 와서 뵈니까 굉장히 이 젊어 보이시는데 이 건강관리는 어떻게 하시고 어떤 걸로 모티베이션 하시는지 캐시우드께서 보시기에는 코스피수가 얼마까지 갈 거라고 예상하시는지 그런 게 좀 있을까요?
We believe that this AI revolution is so profound. Korea will continue to be a significant beneficiary. That Tesla is one of our largest, or the largest holding in a number of our portfolios is Tesla.
이 테슬라가 브레이크아웃 하는 걸 우리는 기대를 많이 하고 있어요. 테슬라가 앞으로 어디까지 성장할 수 있을 걸로 좀 보십니까?
We're in print at $2,600. That's more than a six-fold increase in the next 4 years.
요즘에 가장 파괴적 혁신이 일어나고 있는 섹터나 이런 거는 좀 어디를 좀 주로 보고 계십니까?
Well,
인사이더스 리포트 진행을 맡은 슈카 전석재입니다. 전 세계 투자자분들이 가장 주목하시는 분이시죠. 또 우리나라에서도 정말 팬층이 두꺼우신 분이기도 합니다. 미래 산업의 거대한 변화를 누구보다 먼저 읽고 실제 투자로 이어오신 아크인베스트의 캐시우드 대표님을 정말 제가 어렵게 모셨습니다. 자, AI 시대가 거대한 변곡점이 앞에 와 있죠. 과연 어떤 산업과 기업이 미래의 승자가 될지 오늘 깊이 있는 이야기를 한번 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 캐시 안녕하세요.
thank you so much, Shuka. I'm delighted to be here at the Insiders Report, and thank you for inviting me.
캐시, 우리 한국에서는 꼭 하는 질문이 하나 있습니다. 한국에서 본인이 머니트리 시스터라고 불리거든요. 돈 나무 누나. 혹시 아세요?
Yes, I've heard, but I learned only today why I'm called that. Because many people pronounce my first name here, cash,
Cash.
like cash money, and my last name is wood for tree. So now I finally understand it. Thank you.
네, 알겠습니다. 자, 먼저 제가 가장 궁금한 게 요즘에 이 전 세계 사람들이 이제 주목하는 게 저희가 생각하는 한국 주식시장이라고 생각을 하거든요. 혹시 이 코스피에 대해서는 좀 어떻게 생각하시는지 그거 좀 듣고 싶습니다.
Yes, well, I know that half of the market, I believe, is Samsung and SK Hynix.
네.
And those companies are two of the biggest beneficiaries of the AI revolution. So it makes sense. And in preparing for this report, I learned that Samsung is the 11th largest company in the world,
네.
and that SK Hynix is the 14th largest company in the world. Deservedly so, because they are at the heart and soul of the AI revolution. We believe that this AI revolution is so profound. Korea will continue to be a significant beneficiary.
네.
And in fact, it's almost dependent
네.
on your foundry and memory. We found it very interesting that Tesla is working so closely with Samsung. One of our largest, or the largest holding in a number of our portfolios is Tesla. And we look at whom Tesla chooses as suppliers as very good companies as well. I also do believe when there is a big price increase in memory, that Korea responds very rapidly, which the world needs. So I think everybody understands that Korea's role in this technology revolution is very important.
지금 코스피 지수가 이제 8,000입니다. 캐시우드께서 보시기에는 코스피 수가 얼마까지 갈 거라고 예상하시는지 그런 게 좀 있을까요?
Well, in our big ideas 2026, we don't forecast stock markets per se, but we break the market down by innovators and other. And I would put Korea in the innovator space, certainly in terms of the AI world, but also nuclear. I was surprised to learn that 33% of your power is generated by nuclear. In the US, it's 20%. I think that's very good. And the
네.
investments that Korea Hydro and Nuclear are making, and Doosan, very good, because this is going to help with these data centers. They even may partner in space with Elon. Who knows? I don't know. I have no inside information. But also your strength in robotics. I think you have 1,200 robots per 10,000 people. In the US, we only have 300 per 10,000 people. And we know Hyundai owns Boston Dynamics and is also partnering with Waymo. So you've got a very exciting company there, I think, as well. And then in the multi-omic space, so what I think would be the healthiest for the Kospi is if it broadened out. Yes, the memory and foundry stocks continue to do well, but that doesn't mean one's entire portfolio should be semiconductors and related. There are so many technologies evolving now, many of which are represented well here in Korea. But some of these other areas get some attention as well, and so that they are encouraged to invest aggressively and develop in those industries. Another one here is you have in the CRISPR gene editing space ToolGen. So you have a lot of companies that have an innovative, they might be in traditional sectors, but they have an innovative mindset. And so I think the Kospi is going to do very well because it's sitting in, the pole position in many of these technologies.
이제는 반도체 말고 다른 섹터에 투자하는 게 낫다고 생각하시는지 혹시 이거는 좀 어떻게 보시나요?
If you've enjoyed a very nice run in these stocks, and let's say you started with them at your portfolio at 8% and now they're 30%. It is always a good idea to take profits and diversify. And you have a lot of other growth opportunities here in Korea and elsewhere in the world, given your exposure to robotics and nuclear energy and other technologies, including CRISPR gene editing. So all of those are part of what we are calling very broadly a technology revolution.
제가 또 이것도 여쭤보고 싶습니다. 그 아크 인베스트 하면은 파괴적 혁신 기업을 잘 찾으시는 걸로 유명한데 요즘에 가장 파괴적 혁신이 일어나고 있는 뭐 섹터나 아니면 투자하고 있는 기업이나 이런 거는 어디를 좀 주로 보고 계십니까?
Well, we believe one of the most misunderstood parts of the market, which is going to benefit greatly from AI, is healthcare. Many people do not think of healthcare when they think of AI. And yet, thanks to the convergence of sequencing technologies, like DNA sequencing, RNA, proteins, single cell sequencing, the convergence of sequencing with artificial intelligence and with CRISPR gene editing, we're going to be able to diagnose disease much earlier than we can now. And thanks to CRISPR gene editing, we'll be able to cure disease. So there's no more noble calling in terms of investing than curing disease.
그러면은 지금 바이오 기업들의 좀 투자 비중을 높이시고 계시는지.
Absolutely. And one of the large pharma companies that understands this and has the cash to invest aggressively in this space is Lilly. The cash it has received from GLP-1s for diabetes and obesity, that cash they're turning around into M&A. And they bought a company that we owned at one time called Verve, which is addressing cardiovascular disease, trying to cure some of the reasons people have heart attacks.
또 아크라 그러면 굉장히 혁신 기업을 잘 선택하고 굉장히 저희가 보기엔 용기 있다고 생각을 하는데 어떻게 그런 투자 결정을 용기 있게 내리실 수 있는지 그게 또 궁금합니다.
Well, the courage of my conviction and our conviction collectively as an investment team comes out of our research. Our research is centered on something called Wright's Law, which is a relative of Moore's Law. In the semiconductor industry, everyone knows the Moore's law is something like every 18 months to 2 years, twice the power at the same cost or some derivative thereof. Wright's law is not a function of time. It is a function of units, unit growth. And it says for every cumulative doubling, so 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, cumulative doubling in the number of units produced with a given technology, costs decline at a consistent percentage rate. And so that's what we're looking for. And yes, many people describe ARC's public portfolios as the closest you will find to venture capital portfolios. So we are able to look at technologies, analyze their cost declines, how quickly those costs are going to fall, and how quickly these technologies will scale across sectors and industries. So we get evidence with every quarterly report. We're looking at all the numbers, and we're able to tell whether this law is working and which companies are the most important in any new area.
아크인베스트도 뭐 과거에 투자한 기업이 가격이 굉장히 크게 빠지는 경우가 있지 않습니까? 그럴 때 이제 내가 팔아야 되나 이 고민이 굉장히 많을 것 같은데 이걸 어떻게 견디시는지 그것도 좀 궁금합니다.
Well, again, it comes down to our research. And if we see unit growth continuing, which is the most important variable that drives costs down and causes technologies to proliferate, then we will actually, if the company is doing the right thing and our conviction is still there, we will probably use the decline and buy into those stocks. In a bear market, we concentrate our holdings towards our highest conviction names because during bear markets, everything gets hit. So we have a scoring system, a bottom-up scoring system that gives us more or less confidence in the various stocks in the portfolio. And so long-term story has not changed, but short-term the stock is being hit by, let's say, higher interest rates. We will lean into that correction and buy during the decline. Now, one of the lessons we learned during and after COVID was the supply shock caused by COVID hurt unit growth, especially after the Fed raised interest rates so much. The Fed actually hurt the response to the cry for the supply of goods and services. So in a period like that, we learned a lot of lessons back then. In a period like that, we would pull back from the earlier stage companies and move into later stage cash-rich innovation companies. Our focus is only on disruptive innovation, so we won't be buying food companies during a period like that. We'll be buying something more like a Google, right?
요즘에 나스닥 시장이 좀 조정을 받고 있습니다. 그래서 이 조정을 좀 긴 하락으로 보시는지 아니면 짧은 조정으로 보시는지 이게 좀 먼저 궁금하거든요.
We believe that we're in a period called the wall of worry. There's a lot of things to worry about. It reminds me of very early days in my career in the 80s and 90s. The market was worried about inflation and interest rates and geopolitics, but it kept moving up through all of that with the occasional correction. I think this is a healthy bull market and a healthy correction, and it does shake out the weak holders. And I think we'll return to resume the upturn in any time now. It was caused by the U.S. employment report last week, and many people, economists and strategists, think that a strong economy means higher inflation. That is not true when global economy is going through a technology revolution that is increasing productivity. the productivity will decrease inflation over time.
그러면 요즘에도 금리 인하보다 금리 인상을 좀 많이 기대하시는지, 그러면은 지금 말씀하신 그 역사가 좀 반복되는 것 같은데, 과거에 그렇게 금리가 올랐던 그런 대비를 지금도 해야 될까요?
I think this time is very different. The Fed overreacted in COVID and had to reverse
네.
dramatically. The Fed has not overreacted. In fact, it has been easing. We're down to 3.75% on the Fed funds rate in the United States. So there's no overreaction here. And the difference between then and now is the economy is starting to grow fairly rapidly because of productivity gains, thanks to these new technologies like AI. So in that kind of an economy, if the economic growth picks up into 4, 5, 6% or more, it is okay for interest rates to go up as long as productivity is increasing and taking inflation down. And I'll just give you a very important statistic in the US right now. Productivity growth in the US today is 3% on a year-over-year basis, which is higher than it has been historically. The growth in compensation per man-hour is up 3.5%. So if you subtract productivity from compensation per man-hour, you get unit labor cost inflation, and it's only 0.5%, well below the 2% that is the Fed's goal. And we do believe inflation is going to break down below 2% because of productivity. And in fact, we already see some metrics. I mentioned unit labor costs, but there is another measure of inflation in the US. It is called Truflation, and it measures, using blockchain technology, tens of thousands of goods and services, 24/7, every day, even on the weekends. And that headline measure of Truflation is 1.8% right now. Yes, so already below 2%. The core measure of inflation is 1.2% or 1.3%. And we believe as oil prices come down, the Hormuz Strait is opening up a little bit, so oil prices have already started to come down. As oil prices come down and feed into gasoline prices, Truflation, which measures consumer inflation, will drop and actually could move into negative territory. If that happens, then the Fed will have no reason to tighten, even if growth is strong.
네. 그러면은 그 대표님 보시기에는 지금은 오히려 잠깐 하락이고 기존의 성장 추세를 이어간다라고 보시는 거겠네요.
We do believe, because the fears that most investors have are about inflation and interest rates going up. I just gave you a scenario where the big surprise will be inflation coming down and growth accelerating. It's win-win.
그 얼마 전에 그 2026년을 Great Acceleration, 위대한 가속화의 해가 될 것이다. 굉장히 발전 속도가 빨라질 것이다. 이렇게 얘기를 했거든요. 2026년을 콕 집은 이유가 뭐가 특별히 있었을까요?
Yes, robotaxis are an excellent case in point. In June of last year, Tesla launched its robotaxi service in Austin, Texas. We are beginning to understand now, as the data come in, that an autonomous taxi is safer than a human-driven car. If it's safer and it's going to get 2 times safer, 10 times safer, 100 times safer, regulators have to let it happen. That is beginning to happen in the US. So we're beginning to see both Tesla and Waymo move into more and more cities. In terms of the great acceleration, I think in the fourth quarter of last year, Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, called agentic AI the great inflection. And one of the things we've seen moving out of 25 and into 26 is Claude Cowork and then OpenAI's Codex. And we're seeing astonishing numbers. Anthropic's ARR in December, so ARR is annualized run rate of revenues. Its ARR in December of last year, 6 months ago, was $9 billion. Today, it's $47 billion. We have never seen this kind of growth before. Never.
그러면 지금 그렇게 성장이 뭔가 팍 튀는 이 시점에서 우리 투자자들은 어디에 투자하시는 게 지금 가장 좋다고 보십니까?
Well, of course, the chip sector we think will continue to perform. We also believe cloud and data centers, very productive investment opportunities. Amazon and Google are two, and of course Microsoft, three of the biggest data center companies in the world.
그럼 혹시 그 아크 인베스트의 펀드에서도 혹시 이제 반도체 계열 마이크론이라든지 이런 반도체 기업들의 비중을 좀 늘리실 생각도 있으신가요?
So we have a number of semiconductor companies. AMD is our largest holding. And the reason is because we learned from OpenAI actually about 18 months ago. While many people were focused on the GPU shortage, agentic AI was going to cause a CPU shortage. So at the time, NVIDIA was not very much exposed to CPUs. So we chose to invest more in AMD, which is in the top 5 of the portfolio. We also invest in NVIDIA, as well as TSMC, and as well as Cerebras, a newer company that just went public. I also think some of the embodied AI plays. What's embodied AI? It's really the physical and the digital coming together. Tesla is the largest AI project in the world. Well, maybe now SpaceX is. We would also, as they are going public, we would look at OpenAI and Anthropic because they are leading the frontier model movement. So this is really becoming the new operating system, the new software of this AI age.
지금 테슬라 얘기를 이제 계속 해주시는데 사실은 한국인들이 가장 많이 가지고 있는 미국 주식이 테슬라거든요. 지금 캐시우께서 보시기에 이 로보택시가 본격적으로 커지면서 이 테슬라가 브레이크아웃하는 걸 우리는 기대를 많이 하고 있어요. 이게 언제쯤 오실 걸로 보시는지 그것 좀 궁금합니다.
I think it is in the process of occurring now. Tesla's robotaxis have to get into more cities. But by the end of this year, Tesla expects to be in at least 25% of the major cities in the US. And from there, I think into 27, we're going to see very strong growth. It's interesting, the Iran war and the skyrocketing of oil prices has shifted more people, even in Europe. In Europe, Tesla sales were terrible, mostly because of the political controversy. But now they're booming again because of the oil prices. And I think today, Denmark was the first country in Europe to approve autonomous driving. So even Europe is, even the European regulators, and they were the most resistant, are basically saying, we can't stop this because if we do, we will be putting more of our population in danger because robotaxis are safer than human cars.
근데 이 테슬라가 보면은 많은 사람들이 우리가 흔히 뭐 PER 이런 거 보지 않습니까? 그게 너무 높아서 야, 내가 투자해도 되나? 걱정을 하고 계시는 분들이 많은 것 같아요. 이 아크인베스트의 관점으로는 테슬라가 앞으로 어디까지 성장할 수 있을 걸로 좀 보십니까?
Well, we're in print, and we're going to update this number soon, but we're in print at $2,600. And the reason we get, and that's roughly, today we're a little bit below $400. So that's more than a 6-fold increase in the next 4 years. We're about to update that number. Why is that going to happen? because the analysts on Tesla, who are mostly auto analysts right now, they're not the right analysts. We should have a robotics analyst, energy storage analyst, AI analyst to really understand it. We have 3 analysts working on Tesla, collaborating on this model. But even those who are traditional auto analysts are going to start understanding that the margin structure of the new Tesla with robotaxis is so much higher. So the gross margins today are in the mid-teens. The robotaxi gross margins alone would be in the mid-80s. When you combine them, Tesla's gross margins will go from mid-teens, so 15, 16, 17, to north of 60%. And that will get even traditional analysts focused on the fact that this is a big idea. And the cash flow characteristics are going to be pretty explosive. And then beyond that, what do we have? We have Optimus. And then beyond that, we have, or at the same time, Terafab. And then really, in the not too distant future, we may have SpaceX buying Tesla because Elon Musk wants to be fully integrated. And Terafab will develop chips that are special purpose. Special purpose, they're already designing chips for Tesla cars, but special purpose now also for space. They need to be heat resistant. And when you're designing chips for a specific purpose, that's called vertical integration in Elon's mind. He's going to have a competitive advantage relative to anyone up in space. He already does have a competitive advantage. Only Blue Origin has launched a reusable rocket, but only Elon and SpaceX have launched 600 reusable rockets successfully. Blue Origin launched one and then tried to reuse it, but it didn't make it. So SpaceX is 10 years ahead. It's going to own or have a very large share of the global connectivity broadband market, which SpaceX estimates is a total available market, TAM, of 1.6 trillion. It's going to have a very strong position there. And then it is now going to have data centers in space. It owns already 75% of all satellites in the world, even including governments. He's going to need these chips. So back to Tesla, Tesla's going to develop the Terafab, which will enable SpaceX to move into the data center world.
그러면은 캐시우드 선생님
Yes.
입장에서는 스페이스X에 지금 투자하는 게 좋다고 생각하십니까? 테슬라에 지금 투자하는 게 좋다고 생각하십니까? 아니면 둘 다 해야 된다라고 생각하십니까?
Well, because of compliance, we can't say what we're going to do on SpaceX. We definitely think Tesla, this is a very good moment to buy it in this correction. But on SpaceX, it's coming out at a $1.8 trillion valuation, and it will be the largest offering ever, larger than Aramco's $29 billion. It's going to be 75, depending if they do the green shoe, it could be 80 or 85 billion. So is this going to be a good opportunity? You have to believe that they will continue to execute well on the global broadband opportunity, including ultimately direct-to-consumer, which would disintermediate many telecommunications companies around the world. In fact, today we saw India basically saying, we're not going there because this is going to threaten their telecommunications companies. I think that SpaceX will make deals with telecommunication companies. So you have to believe that. And really, that's all you need to believe to think that this stock is not overvalued. I know that sounds crazy because if you price it on last year's revenues, this would be about 100 times revenues. So if you're looking at valuation today, you're probably not going to touch Tesla if that's your time horizon. If you're looking at Tesla with a 5-year investment time horizon, like a venture capital firm, we think it's going to be a good stock just on the global connectivity opportunity. If it then is able to execute on the global data center opportunity in space, that would be another $2.7 trillion market that is going, and its cost structure would ultimately be lower than data centers on Earth. There's too much regulation, bureaucracy, too much not in my backyard. That's why Elon said, okay, let me figure out another way to do this. And that's why we have this whole new opportunity. And then the final one they're going after, even longer term, is they do want to compete against OpenAI and Anthropic. Right now, however, what they've done is brilliant. Their data center in Memphis, and they have another one in Mississippi, they're renting out the GPU capacity. And the estimate for how much it costs to build, somewhere in the 30, 40 billion range, they're both Anthropic and Google have, for the next year, assuming Tesla wants to keep renewing the contract, they will deliver $24 billion in revenue. When the data center itself, everyone's still trying to figure this out. It's somewhere in the 30 to 45 billion range. Already $25 billion, that's a huge return on investment. So in the meantime, Tesla's becoming a neo cloud like CoreWeave, right? That's very interesting because many people thought, SpaceX bought xAI, that's losing money, that's such a losing proposition, and now it looks brilliant. At the same time, they are continuing to invest in the frontier model, and if you believe that compute capacity is the main reason a company's going to win in the large language model business, with its orbital data centers scaling, SpaceX will have the most compute and the lowest cost compute. So we really do believe there's a good chance Elon will come back and compete against OpenAI for sure, given what has happened between Sam Altman and him in earlier days, and Anthropic.
그러면 스페이스X가 지금 1.8조 달러 뭐 상당히 얘기를 하는데 대표님이 보시기에는 비싸다고 보시진 않겠네요. 저희는 지금 약간 좀 가격이 높지 않냐 이런 걱정이 좀 사실 되게 많았거든요.
That's because they're looking at today. Given the way we've modeled this company out and how many opportunities it has, even at this valuation, again, you have to have a long-term investment time horizon. You have to think like a venture capitalist. Invest aggressively now, forgo short-term profitability, so your valuation is going to look high in the beginning, but be in the best position to capture the market. That is what SpaceX is doing, and we agree with that strategy.
그러면 테슬라의 5년 뒤 모습은 어떻게 예상하십니까?
I think by that time it will be part of SpaceX. You know, Elon Musk is a genius, and I remember last year thinking, you know, he's using this word convergence, and he even posted on X that even he is surprised at how the various companies he's formed are complementing each other and should converge. And it was our first thought, wow, would he buy Tesla? And then, of course, with the data center opportunity, which he announced, and then Tesla's Terafab announcement, we said, aha, there's the connection.
일론 머스크의 테라팩, 이 반도체 공장, 이것도 성공하실 거라고 보십니까?
Yes, I do. And I do think Samsung's already an important partner on the AI 4 and 5 and soon to be 6 with a plant in the US. So I think there's a solid partnership there. And, you know, if I were a holder of Samsung, I'd be very excited about that partnership.
그러면은 올해 이 스페이스X 말고 오픈AI나 이 엔트로픽도 지금 상장을 한다고 알고 있는데 그러면 캐시우드 선생님은 나머지 두 회사들에 대해서는 혹시 좀 투자하고 싶지 않으신지, 스펙스가 좀 더 낫다 이렇게 생각하시는 건지 그것 좀 궁금합니다.
So it's interesting. We own all three in our venture capital fund right now. And so you're asking me to choose among my children. I'm kidding. But we think that these three companies are going to define this new age that we've been talking about since we began this interview. The Mag 6 defined the last world, and they'll participate in the new world, but they have to adjust radically, and so do their shareholders. I think the shareholders are shocked that Meta platforms, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon are spending so much money. They used to be cash cows, and investors felt very comfortable. This is a very different dynamic, and you know, they're not pure plays in this new world the way that SpaceX, OpenAI, and Anthropic are.
그러면은 지금 그들의 시가총액보다 방금 이제 말씀하신 그 세 기업 또는 어떤 미래 AI 기업이 그걸 뛰어넘어서 벤처 캐피탈의 시각으로 5년 뒤에는 더 높은 시가총액, 지금의 뭐 엔비디아나 뭐 그 이상으로 갈 수 있다고 보시는 거겠네요.
Yes, I think NVIDIA's market cap will also go higher. It is, you know, today, even if we assume that NVIDIA's market share drops from what was 85% to 55%, which is what we are assuming, NVIDIA is still going to be a good stock. It's not going to have the parabolic moves that we've seen historically, but it will be a good stock. It has launched this new age, and it did so with its GPUs and CUDA, its software. And CUDA is still, you know, the best software out there. It is able to adapt to many, many frameworks out there. So we think NVIDIA is very much a part of this new age.
한국은 워낙에 반도체 기업들이 민감하다 보니까 이제 방금 말씀하신 엔비디아를 포함해서 빅테크들의 이 AI 카펙스가 계속 증가할지도 좀 관심이 많거든요. 빅테크들의 이 AI 투자 앞으로 계속 증가할 걸로 좀 보시는지요?
I do. This is an arms race. If you don't invest as a big tech company, you're not going to have a chance to stay in the game. You know, at some point when no one's worrying about this anymore, see, I like it when people are worrying. When no one's worried, that's when you probably want to take, not just take profits, but take positions down significantly. I'm happy that there is so much worry out there because we think we're not in the 8th or 9th inning for AI. We're in the first inning. And, you know, this technology has miles to go.
혹시 캐시우드 선생님만의 어떤 기업을 사는 지점, 파는 지점, 아니면 어떤 시그널 이런 게 있으십니까?
Well, there's a famous saying out there, and it might be Warren Buffett who said it, buy low, sell high, right? So it is interesting how many momentum players there are in the market. And I think part of what has happened is algorithmic trading with really quant research behind it. And, you know, we've been, momentum players have been rewarded over time. But if we're right, and there are some discontinuities here, where, you know, there are disruptors who are growing so fast, it is going to have an impact on other companies. So, you know, we are trying, and again, our research is our starting point. We're trying to discern who the big winners are and who's going to have to adjust a little bit more aggressively to stay in the game and who's going to lose. So yes, it is somewhat of a contrarian way to invest these days. But actually, when I started in the business, you know, the mantra was buy low, sell high.
그렇죠. 근데 사실 저희가 느끼기에는 아크인베스트는 어떤 안목, 남들이 보지 못하는 그 미래 가치를 바라보는 그 시선 이런 거라고 생각했는데 전혀 그렇지 않고 오히려 더 많은 공부, 더 많은 리서치를 통해서 이걸 좀 강조하시는 것 같습니다.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Starting point, we're sizing the markets. That's the top down. That's our starting point. And then from the bottom up, we have a scoring system. The first one is management, people and culture. Do we have a visionary leader who is willing to stand up to short-term oriented shareholders who want their profits now, their dividends now, their share repurchases now? Whereas our philosophy is, no, you need to spend more in order to capture this new opportunity. If you just service your shareholders and don't invest enough, that's why our short term, that's why our PE ratios or price to revenue ratios look so high. We are happy when our companies are spending aggressively because we think these opportunities are so big. And those who invest the most are going to win. There are 6 metrics. That's the top one for me. And we watch where talent goes. If someone we really like and respect as a leader leaves one company, that's a demerit in the score. If he or she goes to another company, the score of that company goes up, right? The second most important of the metrics is valuation. And you know, many people look at the premium multiple of our portfolios today, but they do not understand what these companies will look like in 5 years. The premium valuation is today. We make an assumption that that premium valuation is going to come down over 5 years. And our analysts and portfolio managers have to believe that revenue growth and margin expansion will overwhelm the multiple compression and deliver a minimum 15% compound annual return over the next 5 years. So those are the 2 most important. I'll just mention the other ones. Moat, or barriers to entry, that's often technology, patent, speed to market. The other one is execution. Execution is not like the traditional way of looking at it. We want to make sure that companies are spending enough on R&D as a percent of revenue, and that they're spending it in the right place. And I'll give you an example why we sold a stock because of Moat. Toyota had the pole position in electric vehicles. It had the Prius and everything. But the government in Japan decided that the Japanese electric grid could not support transportation. So they went to hydrogen fuel cell technology. We thought that was wrong, and we sold the stock. And then the other score is product and service leadership. There are a lot of surveys about market share, but what we're able to pick up, because we're on social media all the time, we give our research away on social media, and we get a lot of social sentiment back. Hey, I like this company's product, or I really don't like this company. So we have an added source of input there. And then the last metric that we monitor and score is called thesis risk. What could go wrong? In the world of disruptive innovation, regulation can go wrong. And so with robotaxis, as I mentioned, that's becoming less of a problem now. So that metric has gone up and supports the position in the portfolio.
우리는 보통 영업이익을 많이 보거든요, 일반인들은. 근데 어디에 더 투자를 많이 하고 있냐, 이제 그런 수치를 더 중요하게 본다. 이게 맞습니까?
Well, it's one of them. I mean, all of those metrics matter. So yes, we want to know that they're investing aggressively in the technologies or with the technologies that we think are going to drive economies forward, increase productivity and so forth. It's a very important metric. I would think in terms of just summarizing, that 15% compound annual return, even with a significant correction, and it can be, let's say, a multiple is 50 times now, we'll assume it's going to 18 times EBITDA in 5 years. That's a big headwind. And so the revenue growth coming out of the investments that have taken place now, it must be significant enough, and the margin expansion significant enough to encourage us to invest in companies. And because many investors, most investors, unless they're in the venture capital world, are not doing this kind of analysis, we do look odd, but that's okay.
네.
I'd much prefer to be research-driven, with high conviction, concentrated portfolios when others aren't doing that.
그러면 5년 뒤에 드디어 지금 말씀하신 대로 막 매출이 오르고 영업이익이 쫙 올라가면 주가도 이제 어느 정도 따라 올라가지 않겠습니까? 그럼 아크 같은 경우에는 야 이제 가파른 성장이 멈췄구나. 충분히 가격이 올랐구나. 그럼 여기 있는 돈을 팔아서 다시 새로운 기업을 찾는 대로 투자 금액을 이렇게 바꿔가나요?
Yes, yes.
네네.
So that will help me explain the definition or the characteristics of technologically enabled disruptive innovation. They meet three characteristics. One, we talked about earlier. They're technologically enabled, so they follow learning curves, which are expressed in cost declines. And as costs and prices come down, unit growth goes up. That's the first one. And then as the prices continue to go down, more and more industries have access to this technology. And then the third is these platforms, the innovation platforms, serve as launching pads for new technologies. So a good example there is, we've been investing in sequencing technologies and AI, but only now are we able, with gene editing, to correct mutations or programming errors in the genome. So if we didn't have sequencing technology and AI working together, there'd be no reason to have CRISPR gene editing. We wouldn't have it. It wouldn't be possible to find where those mutations or programming errors are. So one innovation leads to another.
아크 인베스트의 이런 새로운 생각, 또 이런 투자 철학, 이거를 굉장히 좀 좋아하시는 분들이 많습니다. 그래서 이 아크 인베스트의 투자 철학은 뭐다? 요거를 좀 짧게 말씀해 주실 수 있을까요?
Well, our philosophy is to research and invest only in technologically enabled disruptive innovation. The seeds for everything that we're seeing today, this technology revolution, the seeds were planted in the 80s and 90s, and they've been germinating for all these years. And now we see them flourishing. I think people are so surprised by how rapidly AI is taking off. It was slowly, now all at once. We'll see the same thing with robotaxis. That's all about AI and robotics and energy storage. I mentioned in healthcare, we're going to see profound changes. So I've been waiting for this moment all my career, and it's here. Yes, so there were a lot of doubters, but then we had the ChatGPT moment, and then everything changed. And I think Korea saw that before the United States when it came to ARK in many ways.
한국에서 사실은 아크 인베스트보다 더 유명한 단어가 아까 처음에 말씀드렸던 이 돈나무 누나거든요.
Yes.
예, 이렇게 누나가 한국에 와주실지 아마 몰랐을 것 같고, 제가 와서 뵈니까 굉장히 젊어 보이시는데 생각보다 나이가 많으셔서 제가 좀 깜짝 놀랐습니다. 그래서 그래서 되게 젊게 보셨거든요. 한 60 정도로 저는 이제 생각을 했는데 워낙에 친근하게 저희가 누나 하다 보니까 이 건강 관리는 어떻게 하시고 이런 열정은 또 어디서 어떤 걸로 모티베이션 하시는지 그거 좀 알려주십시오.
Well, I think it all started with my father. He was very tech-minded, and he was an Irish immigrant in the United States, and got into design engineering during what he called the dawn of the electronic age. And I saw my father stay young because he loved innovation. He's about to turn 100 next month. So he inspired me. I think innovation keeps us young. As I told you earlier, I've been waiting for this moment my entire career, and it's happening. And it's just such, there's exhilaration, even though it's a volatile market. I'm not telling you I'm happy every single day with how the market's behaved, but I think the direction is up. And in terms of other things that I do, you know, I was doing intermittent fasting before it became a thing. I didn't even know it was a thing. So I eat one meal a day, and that's been helpful. I've gotten much better about sleep. And exercise. I just do normal, common sense sorts of things. And I'm surrounded by brilliant people at ARC. The team we have at ARC is not only are they brilliant, but they are really good and kind people. And a fantastic team. With great respect and trust for one another, that is a very healthy environment. A lot of people go into work and it's a toxic environment, right? So I've tried to create, you know, a healthy environment so that everyone can sustain. And I think young people keep older people young, especially they keep us thinking about things that if they weren't around, maybe we wouldn't think about them. I don't know, but I think there's, you know, I feel my synapses firing in my brain all day, every day in a very exciting way. And well, thank you for the compliment.
자, 그러면은 이 돈나무 누님의 팬들이 생각보다 우리나라에 대단히 많습니다. 그래서 이분들에게 전하고 싶은 말씀이나 뭐 투자 인사이트라든지 하고 싶은 말씀 부탁드립니다.
Yes, I've been looking forward to this trip because I heard about Money Tree, but that's not the reason. I think Korea's love of innovation and excitement about the new world that is happening because Korea is a very important part of making it happen. I've just wanted to come and visit Korea. I was here 4 years ago, and it's been too long. So I hope to make this a regular visit and to meet many of you. So thank you so much for all of your support. And I guess that's what I'll say. Thank you.
여러분 오늘 어떠셨습니까? 자, 아크인베스트의 캐시우드 대표님과 함께 했는데요. 생각보다 너무나 밝은 에너지, 이 열정 어린 모습이 저보다 더 이 에너제틱하신 게 아닌가? 그런 느낌을 많이 받았습니다. 자, 우리 캐시우드 선생님이 이 AI 시대의 거대한 변화와 또 5년 뒤를 봐라. 이 리서치가 정말 중요하다 이런 말씀해 주셨는데 정말 개인들이 따라가기는 쉽지 않은 그런 인사이트가 아닌가 생각합니다. 오늘 대표님이 해주신 얘기가 여러분들의 그 투자의 인사이트 큰 도움이 되셨기를 기대하면서 오늘 말씀은 여기까지 듣도록 하겠습니다. 자, 인사이더스 리포트 파트 1은 여기까지입니다. 자, 파트 2에서는 다사운용사 부사장님과 함께 더 많은 이야기를 이어가도록 하겠습니다. 자, 오늘 먼 곳에서 오셔서 저희와 함께 해주신 캐시우 대표님께 다시 한번 인사드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 땡큐 캐시.
Thank you. Thank you,
감사합니다.
Shuga. Thank you. Thank you very much.